Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining and listening. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think will be helpful, especially for those of us that are in that category of a trailing spouse. My name is Susie Church Brown, and I am here today with one of my favorite people,
Aw.
Lisa Tilstra. And she and I are going to be talking about what it is to um, as we're going to call it, choose your own adventure as a trailing spouse. So welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Susie. It is awesome to be back and get to chat with you, especially about such a dynamic, interesting topic. And while I feel like I'm in the midst of another huge professional transition in my life, yet another.
And how does that feel?
Familiar. It feels very familiar. That's the first description I will use because it has happened repeatedly in life. I think for my first major professional transition was more unexpected because of external life events that I had no control over. When my first husband got sick and passed away. And then since then, there have been repeated transitions that have been more by choice, some by choice and some by the force of lifestyle and becoming a lucky trailing spouse and having to move every 2 or 3 years to different countries and different parts of the world.
And I feel like many of us enter this lifestyle as trailing spouses. And a lot of us have professions before we start doing this. And many of those professions are indeed portable and you can make it work, obviously, depending on all of the agreements at post, et cetera. But many of those professions don't translate as well to being portable. And that's where that need to be flexible is. And I know that you have done a lot of like contracting, quasi-contracting sort of employment opportunities. You were a teacher for FSI courses where you got to do that as well. So you've been unbelievably flexible in your employment and different ways to like really professionally embrace different sorts of opportunities. What do you think is necessary for today's trailing spouse, today's EFM, to be able to be a flexible and not flexible, happy in foreign service life?
Hmm. That's a really huge question.
Hmm.
There's so many different things that come to mind. I think that there's an element of it for me that I had to learn over time. Our first overseas assignment was in 2012, and I had no idea. I mean, I thought I knew what I was getting into, and yet in hindsight, like I had no idea. There was just so much to learn. And it took probably to our third post to where I felt like I was getting better at the life, the living someplace for 2 or 3 years and then moving and transitioning. And I mean, that weaves into how I have chosen to design my professional life too, because those transitions were really challenging in those early ones and they became less challenging. And I mean, you know that I use the phrase less difficult and trying to make life less difficult a lot. And that resonates for me because I have found that these transitions continue to have really difficult parts. And also there's ways to make them less difficult. So I think one of them, so if I'm more specific, I would say like one of the things that's really important is to take time to really understand ourselves. I'm wired up to enjoy variety. Some people really like things to stay the same, and we tend not to choose these things. They're just kind of wired into us, or maybe upbringing or personality, things like that. And first of all, just understanding that about ourselves, because they're going to translate into different needs of how we shape our lives. And I think, second of all, thinking about the set of skills that are involved in this lifestyle, being a trailing spouse, changing jobs, maybe even professions, depending on all those factors. That's been really helpful for me. You mentioned flexibility, and there was a moment I remember sitting on a plane and studying this emotional intelligence framework that has flexibility as a skill of emotional intelligence. And I was like, oh, I need to develop that skill right now in my life. We were in the midst of getting ready to move to a new post. And I just remember zeroing in on that and being like, yep, I need to strengthen that skill of flexibility.
And it's really hard because sometimes it feels like when you're being flexible, you're actually just giving up the pieces that you want or that you feel you need. When
Yeah.
actually it's not all about just giving up the stuff that you need, right, in order to for your direct hire or family to do well. It's giving a little maybe re-aiming what goals are, re-aiming what your end piece looks like. I think that is flexibility. What you and I have often talked about superhero strengths, and I think flexibility really is one of those, because it is I think one of the keys to happiness in foreign service life, because there's so many other things that change. So figuring out what is your definition of happy and home, and what you need in order to be fulfilled in different ways, it literally cannot look the same from country X to country Y to country Z.
Yeah. For you, is it a skill, if we just continue to call it a skill, that comes pretty naturally because of your personality and everything, or is it something that you've had to really focus in on developing over the years?
I mean, we moved a bit when I was a kid too. I think I grew up as a twin, so I didn't always get to do what I wanted, no matter what, even like how I celebrated my birthday. Um, always had to share. But also, like, I am a people pleaser. I admit that wholeheartedly, and I embrace that particular skill of mine. Um, and I feel like in order to be able to be true to that, I have to be flexible. Does
Mm,
that mean that it's something that I'm good at? Maybe. Um, but I also feel like um, this is something that I is probably more of a skill for, and not to not stereotype or anything, but I do feel like this is probably an easier skill for women versus men,
mm,
just for gender roles and stereotypes, etc. But also, like, um, there's a lot of amazing things about being a parent, but generally, um, the more flexible a parent is in what it is they want to, for example, accomplish in the day. Maybe, getting
mm.
dressed isn't going to be on that list today. Um, it's just those little things that you kind of start to realize, okay, so yeah, I need to be able to trim back on what I'm going to do or say or accomplish, because these other people need these things, and these people are important to me, and their happiness is important to me, so therefore, okay, I'm happy that they're
Yeah.
happy. Not
Yeah.
that makes me sound like I'm super self-sacrificing, not at all, but
Well, I would say that you are super self-sacrificing. And it's an art form, right? Like, I'll say that, like, it's a skill and an art, because you mentioned being a people pleaser. I resonate with that as well. And we've in my life, I've figured out, like, I've got to find the balance, because I do really want the people around me to be happy. And there's times where I don't have any problem at all, making, the sacrifices and changing my plans and being like, no, totally, like, let's go, with what you're thinking. And then there's other times where the resentment builds up inside. And that I've had to learn over time of like, I can't let that build up because it becomes toxic for me and for my closest relationships. And I mean, that's involved some work with therapists and counselors and coaches over the years to help me figure out. And again, like it's like this balance of art form, of blending the flexibility, but also, hey, like this is where I do need something for myself. I'm gonna set a boundary or something like that, or just say like, I'm not willing to compromise on this. I'm willing to compromise on these things, but there's a few things that it's like, no, I need these. I'm going to, just make sure that I kind of protect those aspects.
Do you think that EFMs and trailing spouses actually do get to choose their own adventure?
Oh, that's such a good question. I had a conversation just the other day with someone where we were talking a lot about choice. And there have been many times in my own life where I have felt like it is not a choice. I am following my spouse around the world and I just have to suck it up and, go wherever the next assignment is. And I felt that way a lot on our first assignment. We were in Manila in the Philippines, and I had just before moving there, I had retrained as a coach. I started my own coaching business, and then next thing I know, we're moving to the other side of the world. And I was resentful because even though I knew it was going to happen, right? It wasn't a surprise. I signed up for this, right? It wasn't like I went in kicking and screaming. But I remember how much courage it took for me to start my own business and say, like, okay, I'm going to try and make this work. And I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to fail gloriously. And after working up all the courage to do that and quit my other part-time job that had the steady income, it was maybe a week, 10 days later that John got his assignment. And I'm like, oh, okay, in 5 months, we're moving to the other side of the world. And I remember just thinking like, how am I going to do this? And why am I going to do this? And what does this mean? And am I going to be able to find any sort of success? And in the 2 years that we were there, I had a lot of times of just feeling resentful. And I would say living in that space of being the victim and not having a choice. Well, I mean, yes, technically I have a choice, but really I don't really have a choice. And in our second post, we went to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I remember it being a lot of discussion because, okay, well, that's a very different culture. At the time that we were moving there, women couldn't drive, lots of limitations. There was nothing to do there as far as entertainment and, kind of just extra things in life. And I remember ahead of time saying, I've got to make a choice. I have to make a choice and own it because it's going to be hard. And there's going to be times that I'm not enjoying it. And I have to go in saying, like, this is my choice to also be here. It's not just something I'm stuck with. So that was a transition for me. And it's more of a mindset shift than anything externally that changed, that it was like, yeah, this is my choice. Is there background noise coming through?
No.
Okay. I have a noisy washing machine behind me.
Ah. So that mindset, you've adopted that same mindset for subsequent posts, or was that just that one I'm moving to Riyadh. There is nothing. Now I have to figure it out.
I would say it's I look at it as, I guess, like a combination of a mindset shift and a skill. And I think something that has helped me with this is thinking about how my brain has these neural pathways and ways of thinking. And over time, like if I practice thinking a new way, it becomes a stronger neural pathway, a stronger way to think. So in saying like, okay, this is a skill to develop, this is a new way of thinking to develop, over time it becomes easier and easier. It's like strengthening a muscle, and it becomes stronger and stronger. So I have been really intentional because my life is much better. And I remember having a coach talk to me, and I was in that phase of like, I don't have a choice. I'm like, and she just said to me, she's like, Lisa, that's not a very empowered way to look at this, is it? And I was like, no, it's not. And her voice, it was a beautiful, loving, comment back to me. Her voice has stayed in my head over the years. And when I get in those, because I can still get in those places of feeling sorry for myself and feeling like a victim, I sometimes hear Chris's voice, and she's just like, well, that's not a very empowered way to look at it. I'm like, no, it's not. How can I look at this in a more empowered way? Because I am more content. I am a happier person. I'm a nicer person when I do shift into that mindset of I do have a choice. And maybe sometimes all the choices are difficult and maybe not like great choices, but I still have a choice.
How do you how do you approach that? You're on that you have that difficult decision to make. I am moving, or maybe not, but I have this opportunity, maybe a professional opportunity, maybe some sort of different engagement, some sort of like fulfillment opportunity. How do you step off? How do you decide to step off and take that opportunity? Because it's scary, right? All of these, like, it is a change. It is something that will definitely make things very different, might change the relationship and dynamic between yourself and your spouse. Like, how do you make that decision and take action? So I guess that's a two-part question.
Yeah. I want to I want to hear how you have made that decision a little bit while I let my brain think, because I have a bunch of different thoughts coming into my brain, and I'm curious how it's been for you, if you have developed any particular strategies in your own life for making the decision and taking action.
That's a good question. I've been super lucky in that our very first post way back in Niger, we talked about like, what do we do? What does Susie do? Because I was a professor before we started this foreign service career. That clearly did not travel well.
No.
Not a profession. um, and I remember on the same day, I was offered two different jobs, and I picked the one that was in the embassy, thinking about like sort of like longevity, thinking about retirement savings. Yes, that's boring, but TSP and retirement is super important.
Mhm.
And I can't say that all of my jobs have been like in my area of expertise. I've certainly brought in those elements everywhere, so able to kind of stay like fulfilled that way. But I do feel like every single one has like contributed to a positive community, which is really important to me. Like that is something that I really value. Um, there was a point when I was pregnant with my youngest that I remember thinking like, but this isn't enough for me. And that's when I did my coach training to become a parent coach, and then included a lot of the health and wellness aspects in that as well. And I feel like to be able to have done both of them, you have the thing that gets a paycheck, and then you have the thing that like really feeds your soul. And I've been so lucky that I've had the opportunity to do both, really, until we moved here in our current post in Sri Lanka, where I have the privilege of working in a section, but in a really time consuming sort of a position. And it doesn't really allow as much as I would like for the things that my coaching and health stuff. And I have found I really miss it. And to me, that's been helpful for me to identify what I actually want to do, where I actually want to put my time and energy. Maybe it's fortunate. I don't know. I'm going to tell myself it's fortunate, but there is not an opportunity for employment right now as a EFM that is moving to their next post, thanks to our current job freeze. And so that's going to give me a lot more opportunity to kind of explore how I can continue to maybe expand on the things that really do just really make me happy. And that is contributing to the community and doing health and wellness stuff. And that is something that's very scary and also like sort of really fun and exciting.
Well, as someone who has had the benefit of being part of the community where you are sharing your expertise and talent in the health and wellness area, I get excited when I hear you say that, because you have so much knowledge and so much expertise in this area. And I think it's one of the things that we as EFMs and trailing spouses often face is, okay, well, here's my area of expertise and experience. And well, this job over here that has almost nothing to do with that is the one that provides stability and provides retirement and a steady paycheck and all of those things, which practically are really helpful. So yeah, but it makes me excited that you are going to have time to, you are given this beautiful opportunity.
Gift, really.
A gift to see how that develops. Yeah. And I know, I know, again, kind of like from the community perspective, I'm like, wow, okay, the community that you're going to will have an amazing gift in you focusing there.
Let's see if we can convince them of that. All right, question's yours now.
So remind me of the question, because my brain has just been so absorbed in your answer.
How do you get yourself into the framework and taking that step and figuring out like, this is a change and it's scary and it's big and maybe a little uncomfortable, but I'm still going to take it. I'm still going to do it. Choosing your own adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts again that come to mind. And one is, it depends on how we're wired up. Being someone who likes change, I and I think combined with that earlier life experience where change was foisted upon me by external circumstances in a pretty difficult way, kind of gave me this perspective like, oh, well, if I can survive that change, I can manage whatever comes along. And so I think that I have tried to create value there of like early life change and loss and say, okay, I figured out a way to go through this. How can I use that experience to figure out how to go through these future and current changes? And I feel like I'm in the midst of a pretty significant questioning of what I want to do when I grow up once again at this point in my life. And, a couple things that I find really helpful is talking to other people, and be it friends, be it family, people who know me well. And it's interesting because as I've had some of those conversations recently, like paying attention to the feedback, because people are helpful, especially people who know me and have known my journey, because it might feel really scary to me. I'm like, oh, like, am I being crazy? Like I have this thing that I'm doing and it's working. So why would I stop doing that? Why would I choose to take a different turn if I didn't have to, right? Like, because this is sort of like a transition that I'm not being forced into. It's more of a choice. And to have people who know me well and I trust listen to me and be like, yeah, I can see that, Lisa. I've known you, over the years and seen you transition. Like that makes sense. And then also, I've thrown out a couple of random things that I'm considering doing. And I have people say, like, huh, well, that's not what I expected, but interesting. and, and kind of
Mhm.
see, so it's a little bit of a helpful thing. Number one, to hear myself talk about these things out loud, and then also just pay attention to people's reactions. And some people, I know in some earlier transitions in my life, certain people in my life have been voices of doubt and concern and like, are you sure? That sounds like strange or crazy, or what are you doing? And then other people are totally supportive and kind of filtering out who are the people. Some feedback from people I want to really, really take to heart. And some people I want to just let it be like water off a duck's back and just rolls away. Like, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to move on now because those people don't really know me, or, maybe are just filtering through their own experience. So I think that actually can be another skill in figuring this out, of learning to let some feedback go and some people's reaction, just let that go. The other thing I'll say that has really helped me and I've developed over time is looking at all of these things like an experiment, and just saying like, well, it's an experiment. So we're going to try something and collect the data, collect the feedback, and see, what does it say? Does the feedback say like, yes, keep going. I'm enjoying this. I'm, having opportunities. Or is the feedback like, hey, like this is really hard. I'm not enjoying this as much as I thought. The doors are closing. Okay, let me try going in a different direction. So in stepping into something new, just call it an experiment and say like, yeah, I'm going to experiment. And right now I'm at the start of an experiment that we've set a 6 month time limit on. Like, okay, we're going to experiment for 6 months. And part of the value of that is like, if we collect and analyze the data too soon, like, or if we just analyze the early data, like any research project, it might be skewed. And so we need to make sure we have enough data to fully analyze before making some next steps. So the experiment framework has really helped me release some of the fear of like, what if it doesn't work out? What if it, and along with that, the phrase, there's no failure, there's only feedback, something I learned a while back and kind of created as a mantra for myself too when I start to get scared and step into something new. It's like, okay, there's no failure here, there's only feedback.
And every experience, even if it doesn't go the way you imagine it might, it's an opportunity to learn something, either about yourself, about other people, about the situation, about all sorts of things. We're never
Yeah,
too old to learn something, right?
absolutely.
I love the experiment concept, especially because the joy of foreign service. So again, we're going to tweak what many people consider to be a negative, but like you're not there forever. You know
Mhm.
100% that you are going to be moving 2 to 4 years, or in our case, apparently 5 years. And you know that whatever you're doing, if it doesn't fit, then you have the opportunity to change that quite soon. It's sort of like, I joke about this, but it's sort of like hair in the foreign service, right? Like
Mhm.
nobody knows what your hair looked like last post, and nobody knows, what the water or the humidity or whatever is doing to it, because that's just what you have during that post, right? So then you're going to move to the next climate and water hardness and shampoos that are available, and that is your hair. So it's like,
So true.
it's your ensemble.
Mhm.
I this this has been super fun, Lisa, and I think that hopefully we've given folks things to think about. What I'd really love for a takeaway from this conversation is folks to realize, that well, it's not permanent, and that there's always others going through the same thing. It probably will be hard, and it'll probably feel a little uncomfortable, but choosing your own adventure is definitely it's an opportunity for you as a trailing spouse. Skills necessary are flexibility. I'd say curiosity, but we didn't really talk about that, but I would say curiosity,
It's a great one. Yeah.
because you never really know until you try. And if you, well, choose a door that you haven't tried yet, it may very well end up to be something super interesting.
Yep.
What do you think? Are we missing any wrap up comments?
The only other thought that popped into my mind, and I love the curiosity, because you saying that makes me think of the very first time I was introduced to the word of the year, which was about the same time we were about to transition from our first post to our second post. And that was the word that came to me. I was like, this needs to be my word for the year, curiosity. And that was overlapping with my realization that I need to develop my skill of flexibility in order to be successful with this next move. And I will also just add, you said sometimes things will be hard. And the thought that comes to my mind as we wrap this conversation, all the things we talked about have an element of difficulty to them. Like it's hard. It's hard to make that choice, to develop these skills and to really choose, like, okay, I'm going to take ownership. I'm going to make a choice. Yes, there's certain elements I don't control, but what can I control? All of this it's hard work. And I would just say it's hard work worth doing, and don't do it alone, right?
Mhm.
Talk to other people, sharing these stories. I think just, in the time that we met and lived together in Sri Lanka, it was super helpful just to connect and share stories and experiences. And so I think, it's hard. It's hard work worth doing, and don't do it alone.
Mhm. That's extremely valid and important advice. Thank you so much for this conversation. I will link your site in the show notes, but would you like to say anything about the conversations that you share regularly on your podcast?
Well, I have a podcast named Make Life Less Difficult, and that is that is a something that's near and dear to my heart, partially because I'm someone for a long time and still sometimes choose to do difficult things, or just to do things the most difficult way possible rather than making it less difficult. And so I love hearing stories, sharing stories. It really is a podcast where people share their experiences and stories. And hopefully, when we listen to these stories, we feel a little less alone. And that that's enough right there. If I know I'm not alone, I'm not the only one going through this, it can make it a little less difficult. Doesn't magically fix anything, but it's something, yeah, I feel really passionate about and have benefited so much in my own life of hearing other people's stories and knowing I'm not alone. And so, yeah, hopefully it's in service to other people in that way as well.
Thank you for that. Thanks everyone so much for listening, and we will share more conversations again later. Bye.
Bye.